Good afternoon, everyone. As we wait for more of you to log in, let me take a few moments to address some housekeeping matters. First, please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared at a later date on our YouTube page. This session is expected to run for approximately an hour. We've asked our featured speaker to share some of her professional journey for about 30 minutes, and then afterwards we'll open up the floor for questions. Please feel free to use the chat feature to post your questions, and we'll get started in just a moment. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you're staying safe and healthy. My name is Adam Paulus. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Executive Director of NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists. We want to welcome you to our fourth webinar spotlight series. This session is being co-hosted through a partnership and the support of the CDC's Partnering and Communicating Together to Stop HIV Together program. Today's featured speaker actually supported this work by presenting a webinar for us last year, reporting on healthcare barriers for LGBTQ lives. And we'll be adding a link to that in the chat box for you to visit when you have some time. Please help us spread the word about the importance of HIV awareness, testing, and treatment options. We encourage everyone to learn about their status. Now, today, Dr. Bethany Howe is a lifetime member and a national board member of the NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists, as well as a researcher on transgender healthcare and identity. She is also the founder and CEO of Transers, LLC, and the Trans Health Data Collective. Now I'm honored to turn over the mic to Dr. Howe to tell us more about her path to journalism and the stops she's taken along the way.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. I think what I should probably say is the subtitle of this event should be called "How to Never Have an IRA or Build Up Any Kind of Retirement," because it sort of goes all over the place. And the other thing is I would say it is not what you would call it's not what you would call typically chronological. I have done a lot of hopping around, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think what I'd like to do is kind of start and just talk about things in terms of maybe what is maybe a typical post-collegiate path for journalists. And again, you'll find that I'm very atypical, but I think that might be a way to start it. And as we go along, I think I'll probably yap for about 20-25 minutes, and then there'll be a time for questions. But I would encourage you that as we go along, feel free to, if you suddenly think of something, type it over into the chat box. One of the things is I've had 8 concussions at this point in my life. You'll understand a little bit more about that. Why? But as a result, I don't remember a lot of things. And so I'm very aware of, I have a great question and it's gone 3 seconds later. So by all means, feel free to type that in there. But is my first job in journalism was I was a reporter, just like a lot of folks that get into media. Is when I was at the University of Colorado, which is where I got my bachelor's, I started out convinced that I wanted to be in television, and eventually made my way over to print. And what I discovered was that more than just wanting to be a reporter, I wanted to tell stories. And when you start looking at who you want to be as a media professional, I guess that's a question that I would say to ask yourself. And it took me a while to ask it, because I will be honest, I wanted to be on TV because I wanted to be famous. I wanted to walk around and people go, "Oh my gosh, there's that person from television," which is not all it's cracked up to be. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more about that. But as I got further into journalism school, I joined my college paper, and what I discovered was I liked being a storyteller. And I'm not saying you can't tell stories through a video medium. You absolutely can. But for me, I wanted to do something that was longer, um, more about narratives. And obviously, some people can get into documentaries and that kind of thing. But if I wanted to work for some type of news operation, I recognized to tell the very long stories that I wanted to tell, the in-depth ones, a newspaper was where I wanted to be. And I do actually say newspaper, especially those last two syllables, paper. When I started in journalism, we still had newspapers. We still had paper. The internet did not exist. And as that's evolved, I've kind of had to rethink where I am in all this, but I'll get to that as well. But and so I came to be a writer, and
Bethany?
Bethany's muted. Is that muted for anybody else? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bethany, can you hear
Not
us?
just-
You're muted.
Oh,
me.
Oh, now we hear you again.
back again.
Okay.
Perfect.
What I realized was that there was more I wanted to know. And so I went back to school and I got my master's at the University of Missouri, where they allowed me to sort of run riot. And what I mean by that is that I very quickly connected with an editor who, I wouldn't say let me do what I wanted, but made it very clear that whatever I wanted to pursue, he would help me pursue it. And there were just certain things he expected me to do along the way as well. And from both of those, and I think this applies to journalism school and whether you're in print, whether you're in broadcast, is I highly encourage join the student paper, join the student television station, get internships, anything you can do to simulate, and I don't mean simulate, I mean actually replicate what it means to be a reporter, because it's one thing to be able to write stories. It's one thing to be able to go out and do videography. It's another thing to be able to do it on 15 minutes notice. And there is no substitute for the real thing. There is your teacher telling you have a deadline, and there is knowing that if you miss this deadline, that there is no evening news, that there is no front page story. I will never forget my first day as an editor when I was at the University of Missouri. They bumped me up to student editor. And on the very first day, when all the new students came in, the most popular bar in town across the street burnt to the ground. In Columbia, Missouri, it's called the Heidelberg. And let's just say that there are national tragedies, and then there was the burning of the Heidelberg. And I had all of these brand new reporters that had had a 2-week boot camp on how to be a reporter. And it was now go cover the burning of the Berg. And so no pun intended, trial by fire. And there is no substitute for that. Zero, none. I'm not going to say anyone can write, anyone can create a good package when they're not on deadline, because they can't. But the ability to do it on deadline is simply, it's not replicable. And so when I finally left and got my first journalism job at a small town paper, there was nothing that I hadn't already been doing. Whether it was a meeting that ran until 11:30 at night and I had to write a story and get it in by 1:30 in the morning, or whether it was a fire, whether it was a tragedy, I'd already done it. And so, I mean, that's, I guess, a piece of advice I would give. Also, and so I did that, and eventually, what I got into, along with reporting, and this would become an increasing part of my life, although I didn't know it at the time. I also started being a columnist. One day, well, I had just moved to the coast of Oregon, where I still live. And as I was walking along the jetty, a dead starfish came flying out of the water, hit me in the knee, knocked me off balance, and I tumbled down the face of the jetty and just tore my clothes to shreds. And oh yeah, it was unbelievable. and I wrote this column called The Flying Starfish of Death. And I turned it into my editor because I was like, I got to write about this. I got attacked by a dead starfish, which is, pretty epic in a mundane sort of way. And she loved it. And she was like, oh, I'm going to run this. And so that started something that I never got paid extra for it. It was always just sort of a labor of love along with being a journalist. But what I found was that the regular business of, I wrote a column, eventually it ran every single week for 8.5 years. Never missed one. Did not miss one when my wife was pregnant. Did not miss one when I was hospitalized with pancreatitis. And I'm not encouraging this, but I will say that the column I wrote while blasted on painkillers was one of the best I ever wrote. I don't remember writing it, but it's really good. But what that did was that taught me the discipline that of, okay, every week you got to come up with 625 words that somebody else wants to read. And some of them were great, some of them were crap. But what it taught me was the value of just sitting down every week and doing it, because I was committed. I didn't get to say to my editor, yeah, I got nothing funny this week. Yeah, nothing. Nope. Every week had to do something. And so what that got me it's like writing, media, any of this is like anything. It's a muscle. And if you don't exercise it, you lose it. And for somebody that prefers to write longer narratives, I found that writing these short pieces, even though they weren't really reporting, because when you just get to make things up, that's not reporting, no matter what you may hear from various websites and Fox News. My bad, sorry. But what it did was, again, it forced me to always be thinking ahead. I maintained a list of column ideas. I maintained a list of funny things. And that way, when I had writer's block, I would go back to it and it was like, oh, okay, cool. Apparently at some point in my life, I thought having a roll-on named after a chicken was a good idea. I don't know why that was, but let's see where that goes. And so all of this kind of, what it made me realize was this was also sort of the point where I started realizing that my media degree, when I got it, all I wanted to be was a journalist. That's all I'd ever wanted to be. And I kind of came to realize there were certain things about journalism itself that I wasn't terribly attracted to. Number one, it doesn't pay real well. And I'm not saying you can't make money as a journalist, but if you're going into journalism for the money, it's like going to see Star Wars for the sex. You're there for the wrong reasons. But also, what I kind of came to realize was there were other parts of me that I wasn't engaging. And so that's why eventually I became a teacher. Is I found that I loved media, I loved reporting, but I also loved working with students and I loved working with young people. And so eventually, I had an English degree, not an English degree, I had a history degree. I had all these different degrees that when I looked up, all of a sudden it was like, hey, take a test, you're qualified to be a teacher. It was a big shock to me, but I did that. And what I found was that in teaching journalism, I understood journalism better. And so, I've talked to, as I've taught over the years, I've taught, goodness gracious, I taught 12 years in public schools in the United States, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, and then also taught 6 years at 2 different universities, Missouri and Oregon. And what I discovered was the more I taught, the better I understood the craft of what I was doing. Because there's an old joke, there's nothing better to learn something than to teach it. But what was so valuable to me was, as I mentioned, when I got my journalism degree back in 1991, the internet did not exist. Back in 91, newspapers were money machines. They generated massive profits. They had huge newsrooms and they did all these crazy things that there was a lot of money. Not all of them, certainly, but obviously that era is over. But what teaching has done is it has forced me to stay current. It has forced me to be aware of what it means to write for, say, a website. And what I mean by that is that when I worked for a newspaper, you had to have something in by 2:30 in the morning because they were going to run the presses at 4:30 in the morning, and yada yada yada. But the news came out at a certain time every day. There was a time the news came out, which is a weird thought. Now it's the news comes out when the news is done, and that means you're on a 24-hour cycle. And I never worked in that environment. And so teaching it has made me more aware of, as I kind of engage in more freelance writing now, what that actually means, what it means to have to work on a 24-hour cycle. And I have to be honest, I liked the old model. I like as a consumer what we have now, but I really enjoyed sort of every day you woke up in the morning and said, okay, today's going to be a sprint. And it may be, I may go like crazy for the next 8 hours. I may go like crazy for the next 12. I may go like crazy for the next 20. But when I go to bed, I get to hit the reset button and get up tomorrow and do it again. I don't think that really exists anymore. And so, like I say, is teaching has been a way for me to stay current. And I know, like, for instance, my former sister-in-law, she graduated from school with a journalism degree. She now works in PR. But she also teaches one class on the side at a community college in journalism. And so that's one thing that I really would encourage is as people move through their careers, if you have the opportunity and the desire helps too, but if you have the opportunity, teach something on the side. It really is a way to stay current with where things are going. And quite frankly, I find that teaching young people, and now I sound impenetrably old, but it keeps me young. I have a playlist on my iPod that ranges everything from the 1940s all the way up to last week. And some people are like, why do you know that song? And I'm like, well, because my students play it. And they're like, that still doesn't mean you should sing it in public. And they're right on that respect. But I like knowing what's going on. And that helps me do it, especially in the field that I still kind of cognitively call home. But along the way, I did take some forays over to the dark side, as we call it. I went over to PR. And I say dark side lovingly because I love it over here. I joined Disney on Ice, where basically I met Mickey. This is a true story. I met Mickey and Minnie Mouse at an ice skating rink. I was their bodyguard to keep them from getting beaten up. And so we went to dinner afterwards, and they started telling me about all these fun things they did. And I said, gosh, I wish I could skate. And they said, well, we have jobs that don't involve skating. And I was like, really? And 3 weeks later, I was in Hollywood and hit the road. And a big part of my job was media communications, working with media professionals. And because I had that journalism experience as we went into communities, like if you turn on the morning news and you see these events where it's like, this is Fred, he's standing at some random sports arena and there are people doing random sports things in the background. It's all insanely choreographed, as you might imagine, every minute of it, every part of it. I was really good at giving media what they wanted in terms of presenting something they wanted to see, stories that they wanted to tell, because the more I could interest the reporter, the more likely they were to come. And so because I had been a reporter, I was able to say, okay, I think I know what you need. I think I know what it is you're going to find compelling. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes being a reporter is so staggeringly dull and repetitious of doing some of the same things over and over again that when somebody throws you a bone and says, let's do something different, they'll take it. And I don't mean that as any criticism towards the profession. And so I did that for Disney on Ice. And again, gave me a lot of opportunities. Travel the world, Australia, Southeast Asia, China, all over the place. And eventually I got bored and and became a performer. I mentioned I don't have much of a retirement plan. I don't. I worked backstage for a year and a half. The chance came to be Max the dog in The Little Mermaid Disney on Ice. And that doesn't require skating. So I literally ran around on all fours across the ice. And I did that. I did a full-time performer's job at the same time as my full-time backstage job, which was stupid, but I really enjoyed both of them. And finally, they just said, would you just rather be a full-time dog? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And so off I went to Japan and Asia. And I mentioned that, and not because everyone is going to end up being a dog. And I don't recommend that. Especially, I almost got myself kicked out of Singapore, where they have a lot of really strict laws. And I came approximately 3 seconds from saying on the Singapore radio, yes, I do everything doggy style. That would have been unfortunate. Like getting me kicked out of the country. But one of the things I've found about my journalism degree is that it's a gateway degree. What my journalism degree has done is it has allowed me to get in the door. It has allowed me to get in the door of Disney on Ice, which is how I became a performer. And I'd always wanted to be a performer. It got me in the door of the local high school, where they asked me if I would come teach one journalism course. And eventually they offered me a full-time job, which I needed because my newspaper was shutting down all of a sudden. My journalism degree has just been a gateway to a lot of different things. And so again, if I'm kind of dispensing advice, one of the things that as you go out there in the world is you may decide that you want to do something other than journalism. You may want to do something other than PR. And the thing is, you're going to find that you're trained to do it, because experience as a journalist in some weird way gives you experience doing everything. Like working for a small town paper. One day I was covering sports. The next day I was walking around the outside of a lighthouse. The next day I was working with an ambulance team. I mean, I just did all these different things. And, I can't put on a resume, rode around in an ambulance for 2 days. But what you can do is that in interviews, and when you go and you start applying for other jobs and looking at other things, you have the ability to articulate an experience far beyond your own. And because you've written about it, because you've covered it, because you've thought about it in a storytelling space, you sort of have a means to explain where you fit, even into things that you've never done. And so I mentioned that because it kind of that all served me well in what became one of my latest stops, and that was I came back to school one more time to get a PhD in mass media. And one of the things that I found, and this is really interesting, most people that get PhDs in media have not spent any time practically in media. I'm not saying that's a sin. No, I am actually. But they study reporting. They study all these different fields, but some of them have never been a part of it. And I'm like, okay, how can you sit here and evaluate a journalist when you've never been one? And I don't mean that literally, because I do think there is something to be said for critique and evaluation from outside of one's own community. But I just know that when I went through the school, I had a positionality that most other people couldn't appreciate. And I'm not saying it made me, I don't know. I think in some ways it made me more biased. I mean, I would read these studies that my friends were working on, and it was like a critique of small town newspapers. And I would read it, and it's like, have you worked for a small town newspaper? Go suck an egg. But what it does mean is that as I'm out doing research, as I'm out asking people questions, they can talk to me in a way that I was not just a scholar, I was not just a researcher. I have media professionals talking to me about what it means to be a media professional, and having been one myself, I'm able to ask better questions. I'm able to understand better. In so many interviews, they just sort of trail off and they're like, I don't know how to say it, but you know what I'm saying. And I do. And then I'm able to articulate back to them what it is they're trying to articulate to me, but not finding the words. And so I've found that to be incredibly valuable. Where it has been the most interesting is my PhD, is I did a dissertation examining how interpersonal and mass communication impacts people's transgender sense of identity. And to put that in words with far fewer syllables, just being a transgender person, in my experience, a lot of it is constantly having to kind of verify to other people that you even exist. Um, you know, if any of you are ever see on the chat threads, you'll see even in the transgender community, it's like, have you had surgery? Or are you taking hormones? And sometimes people are like, well, if you're not taking hormones, are you really transgender? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. And it's just this constant sort of push and pull with the world about your own identity, verifying it, having to constantly prove it. And so, I'm out there and I'm doing interviews, and I got in one of the quirks of fate that still boggles my mind and continues to play a role in my 15 minutes of fame is Caitlyn Jenner connected with my research and wrote me a big check to travel all over the country interviewing transgender people. And if you put my name in Google Scholar and read my papers, you'll see that at the time I was a research fellow for the Caitlyn Jenner Foundation. And so what that did was that gave me the ability to go all over the country and just sit down and talk to people. Brooklyn coffee shops, parks in Dallas, Texas, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was there for the balloon festival. And so interviewed somebody on a hill as we're watching the balloons inflate. We're sitting there talking about transgender identity. And again, it was what I had learned as a reporter that allowed me to connect with these people in maybe a way that being a researcher never would have. And so that's where my research papers come from. That's where, I'm getting now in the entrepreneurial space where I'm trying to create 2 healthcare companies that work side by side. And it's entrepreneurship as an adventure. Let's put it that way. But again, all of it goes back to what I learned as a journalist, what I learned as a media professional, and that is the ability to listen to other people, to hear other people, tell other people's stories, and tell stories apart from my own. One of the things that I have found most fascinating is the more transgender people I talk to, the more I find that I am pretty abnormal in the transgender space. And what I simply mean by that is that being transgender means an enormous amount of emotional stress, an enormous amount of trauma. And I have suffered very little of it. And so it's made me more empathic to my own community. And I don't think, I'll never know for sure because I've always been sort of wired that way. But I don't think I would have learned those things. I don't think I would have been able to connect with people quite like I have been if I hadn't been a journalist. Because being a journalist, to me, if you're going to tell somebody's story, you have to be able to share that person's experience, even just for a few minutes. And that ability to sort of take your own experiences, your own biases, and sort of set them aside for a few minutes, for a few hours, for a few days, is important. And it's something that I still work with every day. Right now, my full-time job is I run a small nonprofit and I work in the space of fire relief. I got 300 families that lost their home in a forest fire here in Oregon back in September. Most of these people are, let's just say, Trump supporters or maybe a little bit to the right. And yet I have been able to connect with all of them because I have this ability to just sit down and listen and hear their story and then relate their story to others. And it's a really empowering thing. And the last thing I'll say is that, I kind of worked through those in a thematic way, but the way my life actually went was journalism school, teacher, then went and became a hotel manager. Then I worked for Disney on Ice. Then I became a ski bum. Then I went back to school. Then I went to become a journalist, and then I went back to teaching. And then I went back to school, and I mean, and so I think the point I want to make is there's no right way to do this. There is no, is there a typical path? Yes. Is there a path that might be more likely not to have you end up working until you're 75 years old? Yes. But what my journalism degree has allowed me to do, especially the first two, is hop around and do the things that I want to do. Now, I don't really have any retirement coming. I don't quite know what that's going to mean. I'm really hoping everyone I'm related to with money dies first. Love them dearly, but what it's allowed me to do is every time I've had a new passion, every time I've had something new I want to explore, my journalism degree, and not just, and I keep saying degree, but the skills I've learned being a journalist have allowed me to open that door and walk into it. And that's, I think, the big thing I would say is just sometimes you don't know where you're going, but having a background in media, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. So, yes, lots of rambling. Please tell me you have questions.
Thank you so much. That was really, really incredibly insightful. One question I had for especially some of our recently graduating or soon to be graduating student members, obviously you've spent a lot of time in school, both as a student and as a teacher. What advice would you have for recent graduates who are maybe considering graduate school as opposed to going straight into the work world, or those who have been in the work world and are considering graduate school still?
I would ask, let's put it this way, what's your motivation for doing it? And what I mean by that is that I've come to discover about myself that I'm motivated by one thing. What have I never done before? What is insanely hard? And I think I'll go do that. And so that's why I applied to the University of Missouri. It's like, okay, it's one of the best journalism schools in the country. I could never have gotten in there after high school. I want to get in there now. So I applied. But having said that, most of my peers were there because, and I mean this lovingly, but it was basically a very expensive, vocational school for journalists. And what I mean by that is that they had gotten degrees in a variety of things. And they were like, no, I want to not just be a journalist. I want to not just be a writer. I want to be a certain type of writer. And so what I would say is that if you are an undergrad and you're looking at, okay, why would I want to go get a master's? Because to be perfectly honest with you, some of the best writers I know don't have one. And so let me make that very clear. You do not need a master's degree. But what I found is a lot of the people I worked with is they came there because they wanted to work with a certain person. And I'm the grand mistress of the happy accident. My second day at the University of Missouri, I met Jackie Banazinski, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer and one of the great narrative storytelling journalists in the country. And I was just walking through the journalism building at the University of Missouri, happened to see her in her office, said hi, and we got to talking. And I walked out and my friend was like, what the hell did you just do? And I was like, I talked to this person. Do you know who that is? No. He was like, that's the woman I came here to write with. And I was like, oh. And he said, do you know what she does? And he said, yeah, she told me she's a narrative journalist. And so have I. So she asked if she could, like, if I wanted to work with her and she could mentor me. And he's like, what? I mean, and so it was a happy accident. But what I got from that was I got to spend 2 years of working in a crucible with not only one of the best people in the world at what she does, but connections to all kinds of other really good people. And so I would say this is, if you're looking at going to graduate school in the idea that it's going to get you a better job in and of itself, I'm not sure the evidence bears that out. I just don't know. But if you know you want to go to a certain school and work with a certain person and learn certain skills, then I would do that, because let's put it this way. Jackie continues to be my friend. The latest writing I did was a piece for Neiman's Storyboard about advice to reporters who want to cover transgender people. She's also my personal sounding board. We talk a lot of just about life. And I would never have gotten those professional connections. I would not have had the writing experiences I had if she hadn't been my teacher. And there you go. So I would say that's the motivation. Don't go to graduate school because you think it's going to get you a better job. But if there's a certain craft you want to learn, if there's a certain person you want to learn from, and you can go to a school where you get to spend time with that person, oh, do it. Go.
Thank you so much. That's really good advice.
It looks like Andreas has a question. Are you able to unmute
Yes.
and ask your question?
If you can
Fantastic.
hear
you
me
don't
now,
mind
then I'm able.
Yeah,
We
if
can
you're
hear you
able to
now.
introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. My name is Andreas. I use he and they pronouns. I am from, well, originally Germany, but I live in Philadelphia and go to Temple University here in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And my question, first and foremost, that was super entertaining while also being super insightful. So I'm so thankful for you being here today. I have a question about the dark side.
Yes.
Because that is an instance that came up in my so far student career, that I expressed this big dream that I have of creating my own queer feminist media outlet once I graduate, and I want to change the world through journalism, and I really want to hold on to that dream. But then there are professors who've been in the real world, and they're saying, well, at some point you're just going to go into PR. At some point you just have to. And I was wondering if you have any encouraging words, any advice where you would say, well, you better stick to that because giving up is too easy, maybe.
Here's what I would say is every job I've ever gotten, and I've had a lot of jobs where I never saw myself there, but every job I've ever gotten started with me volunteering and using my time and my energy on something that I felt passionate about. And the few jobs that I have gotten that weren't connected with volunteering, I hated, and on both of them I got fired. Okay, so cool. Not in journalism. And so what I would say to that is that, yeah, to pay the bills, I mean, there's following your dreams, and then there's following them to living under a bridge. Is to pay the bills, you may have to do some of those things. But if on the side you're volunteering and you're doing the things you want to do for other people in the service of kind of a greater good, for me, like I say, I use my PR skills for the dark side, so to speak, but now I use them to get messaging out to these 300 families that need to go home. And so what I would say practically is that I'm not going to say do what you have to do to make a living, but there is, I mean, we live in a capitalist society and you got to pay your bills. But if the way to satiate your heart and those things that you want to do, find someone to volunteer for, find someone to put your skills to work for. And eventually what I believe is that'll usually lead to somebody that is so impressed by what you're willing to do for free that they will eventually pay you to do it. And what that does is it gives you a lot of ability at that point to say, okay, how do I want to do this? And then as far as your professors go, I'm not going to say they're wrong. I will say this is when I started teaching at the University of Oregon as part of my PhD, I think I was still very grounded in what I would call the legacy media world. And what I mean by that is this idea that you had to follow certain routes and there were certain ways to get to positions where you had agency or whatever that is. And one of the things I learned by watching my students was how many of them said, no, I want to do this my way. I'm going to go work. I'm going to go get an internship at an obscure little magazine because it believes in my passions, my goals. And it took them a while, but they have turned that into a job doing what they want to do. Media, it's really weird for all the constriction that's happened in the legacy space where I got my original training, it has left so many opportunities to hang out your own shingle. Now, granted, there's a lot of shingles out there, but 20 years ago, what you envisioned, I'm not going to say it couldn't be done, but wow, would there be a lot of barriers to entry? There's no barriers to entry anymore. Now, the bad news is anyone can enter, and man, there's a lot of idiots out there. But if you're sincere about what you're doing and really good at it, there's now a way to do it. There's a space to do it. There's a means to do it. And this is going to be a shameless plug, but get to the NLGJA convention. It is a chance to network. It is a chance to meet like-minded people. It is a chance to meet somebody that, they may have some weird thing and they'll think of you, or you may have some weird thing and think of them and they'll say, yeah, that sounds good. But it's follow your passions, follow your dreams. I think there's room for that, but recognize that, don't go work for, RJ Reynolds. But there's nothing wrong with sort of doing what you need to do to pay the bills, and on the side, doing where your passion leads you, because my guess is that passion will eventually allow you to pay the bills.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Fantastic. It looks like Jeremiah, if you can unmute yourself, ask your question, introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, Ms. Howe. So my name is Jeremiah, and I am a student at the University of Arkansas. And being raised as a gay Black man in the South, I used to think that I had a lot of the issues that, a gay person may have. But listening to you, I have been thinking about how you said, as you talk to other trans people, you see that they also have a lot of issues and there are a lot of problems within the community. So what can people, especially cisgender people, be doing to raise awareness about trans issues in the US and around the world?
Wow. I think, and I sort of live this every day. I kind of have my foot in two worlds. I have my foot in the world I'm kind of standing in right now, and that is getting to talk to students from all over the country. I'm part of the largest association on the planet of LGBT journalists, and that is empowering in a way that it still kind of gobsmacks me, to be honest. Like, oh my God, I'm here. But at the same time, like I say, I work in a town of 8,900 people in an area that is really socially conservative. And what it allows me to do is I just do my job, but it does give me the occasional opportunity to push back on, because people here have stereotypes about transgender people. They believe certain things that I know aren't true. And it's not my job to disabuse them of that notion. I don't get to lecture them. My job is to bring these people home. But what it does do is it gives me a certain agency and a credence with these people, because they don't see me anymore as a transgender woman. They see me as somebody that whenever they call, I try to help them. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to push back sometimes. Like somebody will post something on Facebook and I'll just put back, hey, that's kind of hurtful. That's me you're talking about. And very rarely do I get oh, I'm sorry, but I'm amazed how often that suddenly disappears or they don't do it again. And I want to make this very clear. How people choose to be advocates for their community is completely up to them, and what role you decide to play. I would say if you've come to that decision honestly because it's what serves you and your community best, then that's what you do. And I know that sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but for a while I just was like, okay, you're being too milquetoast, you're letting people off the hook, you're not holding people accountable. And so I was like, I'm going to make people more accountable to the things they say and do and everything else. And what I found was I was angry all the time. And I do believe that there's that what is it? If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Maybe, but I think whatever whatever emotion, whatever part of your being that you choose to lead with, if it's not sincere to who you are, then it's not going to be very effective. I'm not an angry person, and I don't doubt why people are. I know a lot of angry transgender people, and they don't do things my way, and I don't do things their way, but I respect their way. And so I guess what I would say is, even though it's not a great answer, is you can't do a great deal about what the rest of the world is doing. And what I mean by that is in terms of how other people advocate. The only thing you can really do is control what you do and what you believe. And if you're sincere to that, other people will join you. And I've had a number of people in the last few weeks just come up to me and say, hey, I did not have any idea what to make of you in the beginning. And what I've come to realize is that you're just like us. I mean, not just like us, and then they get all tongue-tied, but and they just and they'll even say, I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Like they felt like they had to apologize for something they never said to me. And that's when I know I'm affecting change. You know, again, NLGJA allows me to play a role in having a conversation in newsrooms all over the country, and I'm honored to be part of it. You know, I've helped write the section in our guide about transgender topics, and that's one of the things I'm proudest of in my entire life, to be very honest. But I'm equally proud of the fact that I've got this little town of, 2,400 people, and somehow a rainbow-haired academic hippie chick from Eugene, Oregon, has become a trusted voice of this mountain full of libertarians. That means a lot to me. And so I think there's space for both of those things.
Fantastic. Looks like, Andreas, you have another question?
Yes, and I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you were talking to Trump supporters as well. And I was wondering for you as a private person, but also as a reporter, how do you make sure that you go into these communities while also staying safe, being safe? Because we know that there are some, and excuse my French, assholes out there. So
yes.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm a big believer that you admit what you don't know. And I walk around with the privilege. Let's put it this way. When I transitioned, I didn't lose any privilege. And I know that sounds crazy, but I transitioned in a liberal state, in a liberal school, in a liberal university. I mean, I went from being, and I say this jokingly, but I went from being one more boring white guy to suddenly the voice of the transgender community. I mean, my advisor on the first day said, congratulations, you're the poster child, the transgender poster child for the University of Oregon. Do you want the job? And, I was like, well, do we get jackets? We did not. But the point is that I was given this role of sort of authority in the school. Suddenly I was the spokesperson for the transgender community. And it says something about the way I'm wired that it's never occurred to me that I'm unsafe somewhere. And I'm not saying this is a realistic thing. I'm saying I'm the cockiest bitch on the planet. And I don't know where that comes from. I guess it comes from the first 4 years I transgendered. I was surrounded by people that empowered me every moment of every day. And so I go to small towns in Oregon where transgender people are weird. And I don't even think about the fact that I may be scaring the hell out of someone. I went on vacation 2 years ago and went and hung out in Gulfport, Mississippi, which last I checked might not have been the brightest idea, but I didn't care. And on this paddle boat, I said to the captain, I said, I wanted to say thank you. I said, I was a little worried about vacationing in the deep South, and it's been a great trip, and thank you. And we got into this big discussion about how he had a transgender granddaughter, and did I have any advice? And I'm like,
Bethany, I think your mic went on mute again.
Oh, Bethany, can you hear us?
Bethany, you're on mute, I believe.
oh, no.
Oh, I think I hear you now.
We're back. I've never been afraid, and maybe I should be. I have friends of mine that think I'm crazy. They're like, someday you are going to go the wrong place and someone's going to take it out on you. And I have the privilege of whiteness. I have the privilege of, quite frankly, I'm upper middle class. I mean, I have all that privilege. And so I don't know how to answer that, because it never occurred to me I should be afraid. And I'll end that with just, I remember one night I was walking home, and I looked at my shadow, and my long hair was kind of bouncing in the shadows. And I was like, this is so cool. And I told my friend that the next day, and she said, that tells you that you didn't grow up a woman in this country. The idea of me having a shadow cast across the campus that shows I'm a woman walking alone, she said, that to me is an invitation to be raped. And that's when I kind of realized that there's something atypical about you. And I guess what I can say is that I can at least own that and be honest about it.
Thank you. Now, if anyone has any questions, please post them. I actually have a question. We've downplayed your role as a comedian, but how do you think your comedic sensibility impacted your journalism career?
I mean, my column was a humor column, but also and I'll say this. I think humor is the universal language. It is something that ties everyone together. And I don't ever punch down. I don't ever, the only group you'll ever find me making fun of is transgender people. And even there, I won't punch down in my own community. I'll make fun of my own neuroses. But what I have found is that, I don't know, my comedic sensibilities, my sense of humor, it allows me to connect with people. And even as a journalist, people would, anytime you go to an interview, there's automatically a wall between you and the person you're talking to, because whether they see you as the voice of authority or the voice of an outsider, I find that a sense of humor allows me to connect with just about anybody. And what I've also found is it's my default mechanism. And I don't know how I got that way, because I was not raised to, like, you hear people talk about, oh, my house was nonstop laughter. Mine was not. I mean, it wasn't like a morgue, but it wasn't nonstop laughter. But just somewhere along the way, my default mechanism has been to look at things with a sense of humor. Now, if you've ever seen Hannah Gadsby's special on Netflix, you'll know that there's a dark side to that too. But what I would say is that it allows me to connect with people. It also allows me to process things. And what I mean by that is things do happen to me that hurt and bother me a lot. And what I'm able to do is kind of sit down and process it and look at the lighter side of it. If you don't address the dark side of it, that'll get you in trouble. But it allows me to see things in a different light. And quite frankly, humor is a way of addressing things that make people uncomfortable without making them uncomfortable. And in my stand-up, I do a lot of that. Like I was riffing the other night. My friends just had a baby. And it was the first time I'd held a baby since, I got a chest. And holding a baby is much easier with a chest. There's a place for the head to go, and everyone's got pillows. It's very nice. But at the same time, babies have a suckle reflex, and let's just say I'm about as disappointing as they get. And so, I've been reflecting on that. It's like, nice. You've now disappointed someone as young as 4 days old. There's a new record. And again, it kind of makes me think about, how do I really define womanhood and some other things? But, it allows me to kind of understand parts of myself that maybe I wouldn't otherwise, and connect with other people too.
Thank you so much. It looks like we could take maybe one more question. We have about 5 minutes left, and we have a question from Eric Hall about graduate school programs. I don't know if Eric, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can ask that. So, Bethany, I've toyed with the idea of maybe eventually going back for a doctorate. and I want to study like how media covers LGBTQ topics. Do you think it's better to do that by going to journalism graduate school, or is it like a gender studies graduate school, or like, I guess a more rounded question is, why did you decide to go to journalism graduate school versus like maybe like an area you wanted to specialize in for graduate school?
Well, yeah. The reason I went on the media studies track was that when I actually started my PhD, I was trying to understand the intersection between education and journalism. That's what I went to study. And one of the foremost people in the country studying the intersection of how we use media to teach students, like middle school and high school, was a guy at the University of Oregon. I mean, I lucked out. The best person in the country for me to learn from happened to be 2 hours away. What I would say is this, is it what do you want to know more about? And what I mean by that is, I think if I had known the track I was going to go down with gender identity and transgender identity, I'm not sure I would have chosen a journalism school. I don't know. I know, irregardless, I'm glad I did, because I got to keep teaching journalism classes, which just, I enjoyed nothing more. But in all honesty, by the time, I mean, it was kind of, it's interesting you mentioned that, is all these classes that I should have taken about gender identity and understanding those, by the time I figured out that's what I actually wanted to study, I'd already completed all my electives. And so unless I wanted to stay another year and pay for it, I'm like, I'm not doing all that. And so I do find that I am, for somebody that studies transgender identity, I am woefully underinformed about transgender studies. Now, the degree I chose to pursue was communications as it impacts that. But yeah, I mean, I would, believe it or not, I would recommend finding a program that does have, what I would recommend is a school that has a strong gender studies program, but also has a good journalism school. Because as those two spaces interact, you're going to be in a place that's got experts in both. I happened to attend one of those schools at the University of Oregon, but didn't figure out what the hell I was doing until it was too late.
Thank you so much. I cannot believe that it is time to wrap up this session. I know. Thank you so much, Dr. Bethany Howe, for sharing a little bit about your journey and making us laugh the entire time. And also to everyone for joining us today. Everyone, please don't forget to join us for our first ever student virtual conference on June 25th to 26th. Registration is free to our student members, and our annual student membership is only $25. I know earlier Bethany mentioned our national convention. This year, we're granting complimentary registration to all of our student members to that convention in September as well. Stay tuned. There are more sessions just like this one featuring other leaders in the industry. Make sure to keep your eye out on our newsletter for more webinars and opportunities. Thank you so much, Bethany.
You bet. It's fun. And I put my email address. If anybody wants to email me, go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a good one, everyone.
You too.